Waiting, waiting. Okay. All right. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We're going to just wait a second for a couple more people to log in. But I'm going to start with our introduction because we have a great webinar this evening on protein rotation for pets. So I want to thank you all for logging in this evening. Tonight's webinar is about rotating your pet's diet. CB Pet Market is happy to have the expert advice of Dr. Tom Cameron, DVM, to discuss the systems and genetics that cause our pets to thrive on protein variety. Dr. Cameron will touch on practical tips for varying your pet's diet, how to properly rotate your diet, your pet's diet, navigating digestive upsets that might accompany a rotation in your pet's diet. And also, Dr. Cameron will have time at the end of our presentation to answer some of your specific questions. Just a little bit about Dr. Cameron. He received his DVM from Michigan State University in 1982. He began practice in Waunakee, Wisconsin, concentrating on both dairy and small animal medicine. A longtime proponent of canine and feline nutrition, Dr. Cameron speaks nationally on the role of whole food nutrition in veterinary medicine. We are thrilled that he is joining us this evening, if I haven't mentioned that before. Before we begin, there is a little light housekeeping. This will be an interactive webinar, and we will ask a couple of poll questions up front so that Dr. Cameron will get to know his audience this evening. The poll questions will appear on the right side of your screen. You just need to click on the answer. The formal presentation is going to last about 40 minutes, and we are leaving plenty of time at the end for Dr. Cameron to answer some of your specific questions. You do not need to wait till the end of the presentation to ask your questions. You can type them into the chat bar at any time during Dr. Cameron's talk. The webinar is being recorded, and everyone will receive an email with a link to the recording in the next 24 to 48 hours. And you will also be receiving a $5 off coupon, good toward the purchase of a small bag of Nature's Logic, thanks to Bob Roaming, the territory manager for Nature's Logic, who's also joining us this evening. That's a very generous offer, and it will help us to encourage customers and friends to rotate their dog's diet by, a good discount on a small bag of Nature's Logic. I am going to ask our first poll question right now. And it's a little contest between our store managers. Can you tell me which CB Pet Market store is your home store? Bedminster, our Clinton store, our newest store, Garwood, Livingston, Washington, or do you shop online? Again, so it would be your CB Pet Market favorite store, Bedminster, Clinton, Garwood, Livingston, or Washington, or your shop online. We do have some loyal customers who have moved out of the area and still continue to shop at CB Pet Market, which we truly appreciate. I'll give another couple seconds. And okay. A third of our audience shops online, and 25% of our audience is Bedminster and Washington are our big contributors this evening, which are two of our largest stores, so that's great. Our next poll question is, do you have a dog or a cat, or do you have both? Do you have a dog? Do you have a cat? Do you have both? Okay. We'll give another few seconds, and then I'll give you the answer, Dr. Cameron. So far, we have a lot of dog people. Oh, we're switching quite a bit here. Okay. As soon as I see the answer is not changing, I'll end the poll. Okay. So 72% of our customers have dogs, and 27% of our customers have both dogs and cats. We don't have anybody participating this evening that just owns a cat. So that's good to know.
Okay.
That'll help you because we have dual pets in these houses. And then our next question is, what protein do you predominantly feed? Beef, chicken, pork. We tried to give you a lot of variety here. Fish, turkey. I don't know. I just buy the red bag, or you rotate. I rotate. Give a few more seconds. Beef, chicken, pork, fish, turkey, or I rotate. We have a good number of our participants this evening, Dr. Cameron, who do rotate their diet. And the majority, the predominant protein is chicken. So right now, 33% of our participants this evening feed a chicken diet, 8% feed beef, 8% feed fish, and 50% of our participants this evening do rotate. And then the final question is, if you do not rotate proteins, why? Why don't you rotate? Because I didn't know I could or should. I'm concerned my dog will get upset tummy or diarrhea, or my pet has food allergies and I am on a prescription diet. So if you do not rotate, why don't you? Because you didn't know you could, you're concerned about tummy upset, or your pet has food allergies and is on a prescribed diet. Okay. All right. 57% say they didn't know that they could or they should rotate diets. And 42% are concerned about tummy upset and diarrhea associated with rotating diet. So those are our poll questions this evening. So with that, Dr. Cameron, would you like to begin?
I'd love to. Thank you for having me. This is great to be here again. And based on your poll, it's some valuable information. And your audience is already pretty aware of rotating foods. But there are still some common questions on the best way to do it and a good plan. So I think we're in a good spot. So we'll go ahead and get started. So let's talk about protein rotation in pets. Most of us know that the best way to live a healthy life is to eat nutritious foods that provide all the vitamins, minerals, and proteins and other nutrients that we need. And the best way to do this and to get enough of these nutrients is to eat a diet with a variety of foods. And most of us have known this for a long time. But with that in mind, it only makes sense that we rotate foods in our pets which would work well. So starting a rotational feeding routine for your dog or cat can make them more interested in their food. It can improve their health and even help them live longer. So let's talk about how we can do that. In the wild, cats and dogs, wild dogs and cats, ate what they could catch. And this didn't stay the same to where they ate the same thing morning and evening every day. They ate what they could catch, which would change as far as weather and season and what animals were migrating and anything like that. Dogs would eat rabbits, birds, different small mammals, and then also fruits and vegetables when they were available, and cats very similarly. So variety is not a new idea. It's how those animals evolved in the wild. In the modern day dogs and cats, why would we feed a variety of proteins? There are a few reasons. The first one is boredom. If you ate chicken every day for 365 days for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, I think you would have an issue with boredom, and animals can run into the exact same situation. They can tire of a food. Very often you'll see these animals go off feed, become snackers. Sometimes they'll walk to the bowl looking like they're hungry, sniff at the food, and then walk away. So we can see them just gradually go off their feed because they're just tired of the food. And what this can do is this can lead to behavior problems for them looking for food elsewhere, like in the garbage, on the counters, on tables, outdoors, doing some scavenging and some other habits like that can lead to health problems like digestive upset. So boredom is a real issue when animals have been fed the same food for a long period of time. When we feed one food, when I'm talking about foods, most of us are feeding prepared foods, and so it's not just chicken. It's a number of other ingredients in these prepared foods, but the protein source tends to be primary, and so you buy the food based on this is chicken, or this is beef, or this is fish. So that's what I'm referring to. But when you feed the exact same food for long periods of time, you're feeding a fairly narrow range of nutrients. There is no one single meat that is healthier than another. They all have excellent protein sources and vitamins, minerals, and other nutrients in there, but none of them are complete. And I'll give you a couple examples of that in just a second. So it's a good idea to mix and match food choices, which leads to a wider range of nutrients that your dogs and cats are getting. And long-term feeding of one food or one protein can lead to nutritional deficiencies, okay? It's because each protein has a unique combination of nutrients, of vitamins, minerals, and proteins and amino acids and things like that. And each one is different. So if you feed, we'll look at beef, turkey, chicken, and fish and show you some of the differences. But long-term feeding of one food can also lead to food sensitivities. The body can become sensitive and react badly to this single protein that they've been feeding for a long period of time. And there are a lot of symptoms that are very much like allergies. So I was saying each food and each food ingredient has a different makeup of nutrients. And let's look at some of the proteins. Beef is a very nutrient-dense protein and a very it's considered to be a complete protein, but it doesn't stand alone by itself. One thing that beef really shines in is some minerals. It's one of the richest meats in minerals like iron, zinc, and selenium. It has quite a bit of those. When we look at chicken, we have higher levels of most vitamins in chicken, particularly vitamin A, vitamin E, and some of the B vitamins. There are about 14 B vitamins, and chicken has B1, B3, and B5. When we look at turkey, it's a particularly rich source of B vitamins, but different B vitamins. Like B3, which is niacin, B6, which is pyridoxine, and vitamin B12, which is called cobalamin. And lastly, fish is a very high protein and a low fat food, but fish is filled with omega-3 fatty acids and vitamins like vitamin D and vitamin B2. So you heard a lot of different vitamins, but not one of these meats has all of those vitamins in them. So the only way to be sure we get all of those vitamins, minerals, proteins, and other nutrients is to feed these different proteins at different times. The vegetable parts of our foods and the vegetables, fruits, and other foods that are in our dog and cat foods also have the same unique combinations of each of those foods. And so feeding combinations of those vegetables, fruits, and other foods make a lot of sense and contribute to added variety in the diet. So again, there is no one meat or one food that is complete and balanced in itself. They all have very, very positive qualities and very unique qualities, but none of them are complete and balanced in themselves. Another part of that can be affected by feeding a variety in the diet is digestive health. Eating the same food for long periods of time results in a low number of beneficial bacteria. These are the good guys in the gut, and digestive enzymes, and we refer to that as the microbiome. And so it's a very narrow range of those bacteria who are adapted to eating a very narrow range of foods. To me, this is like doing only one exercise, doing push-ups and doing nothing else. Your arms and shoulders and back will become strong, but none of the rest of the body is going to be in balance with those strong muscles. So if you are faced with some kind of physical stress, it's very easy to get injured when you're out of balance like that. And feeding the same food for long periods of time can cause that imbalance in the gut. So we see this in animals and people who eat a narrow range of food, to where if they get some food that's outside of that small grouping of food, very often they will have digestive upset, and these are animals we speak of as having sensitive stomachs. Eating a variety of foods forces the creation of a more diverse population, a larger number of enzymes and beneficial bacteria in the gut, which makes for more efficient digestion. It's a stronger, healthier gut lining, and it's a more robust immune system, better able to handle different immune challenges as they come along. Something a lot of people don't know is that 3/4 of the immune system is along the GI tract. So the healthier we keep our microbiome or our gut flora, the more healthy and strong and adaptable our immune system is going to be. So very important for overall health of our animals. I mentioned before that feeding the same protein or the same food for long periods of time. When I say long periods of time, when we look at animals who have been diagnosed with food sensitivities or food allergies, most of them have been fed the exact same food for 2 years or longer. And it wasn't uncommon in my practice for animals with owners bringing in animals with these type of allergy symptoms to have been fed the same food for 10 years or more. And so that is something that we really look at, a lack of variety. So the food sensitivity, food allergy symptoms are itching, scratching, possible digestive problems, diarrhea, and just not very healthy. And so they just become intolerant to different foods, or that same food that we feed on a regular basis. So common treatment, another reason to support the idea of feeding variety, is that common treatment for food sensitivities includes feeding a more varied diet, very often with some fresh food in the diet. There's something called food energetics, and I won't get into that too much, but food energetics is more from an Eastern perspective, like traditional Chinese medicine. There are some proteins that are considered to be warming, and that would be chicken, lamb, bison. There are some foods that are neutral. That's beef, turkey, and sardine. And then there are other foods that are cooling, which is mostly duck, rabbit, and fish. So, and why this is important is that a lot of diseases have inflammation, and inflammation brings heat. Traditional Chinese medicine practitioners will use cooling foods to counteract heat. And there are some conditions where there's not enough heat in the body, and so they'll use warming proteins. One concern I have is that chicken is in almost every food, or very many foods, and animals that have been on chicken being a warming food, if they have allergies or arthritis or other inflammatory conditions, that can add to the inflammation or the heat. Eating chicken all the time as only a warming food, to me, is like taking a hot shower when you have a sunburn. They're additive and they become less comfortable. So there are a number of different qualities of foods that the more we rotate them and feed a variety of them, we ensure that our pets are supporting their digestive system, their immune system, staying away from allergies as we can, and being as healthy as they can. So why rotate proteins? You'd want to, the pets tend to stay more interested in the food. They're healthier, and pets, it's been shown that pets fed a diet with variety live longer lives. Okay. So how you rotate proteins is, remember I said there's no single meat that is healthier than another. So it's a good idea to mix and match these foods. You want to start with a goal of, say, 4 different protein foods to rotate. Stay within the same brand. So let's pick Nature's Logic for an example. And so maybe you would want to take Nature's Logic beef, chicken, turkey, and sardine. So that would be 4 different proteins. And say you're already eating, your pets are already eating Nature's Logic beef, and we'd want to introduce the other 3. And this can be further expanded to add other proteins like duck, pork, and rabbit. And so rotating can occur. It doesn't have, this is not an exact science. It really depends on what works best in your feeding situation, but it can occur weekly. It can be every 2 weeks. It can be monthly or bi-monthly, or it can be when you finish each bag. So at the end of each bag of food, we can rotate to a different protein. The one caveat to this is you want to be sure you don't buy too large of a supply of food, because it can become old and even become rancid. Some of the fats in foods can become rancid. So you want to stay with some of the medium to smaller size bags to where maybe the food doesn't last maybe more than a month, and then change them up that way. So just be careful about keeping it fresh. Also, if you take your food and it's a good idea to put them in stored containers, covered containers. Be sure you wash them between bags of food, because the food can be the fats can accumulate in the container and become rancid and just contaminate new food as you put it in there. So think fresh and clean with foods. Okay. So we already talked about how often, and just be careful with how much you buy at one time. when introducing new foods, it's a good idea to talk to your vet and let them know that you're changing protein foods, changing varieties of foods, and they may have some ideas as far as their recommended feeding schedule. And you always want to start gradually. We always want to assume that that slower is better, and until we see how our pets respond to this, let's just don't be in a big hurry. In my practice, when owners are introducing a new food, I recommend that they cut back on the total amount that they feed a day by about 25%. So if, say, you're feeding a cup twice a day to your dog or cat, you would during the changeover period, you'd cut that back to 3/4 of a cup morning and evening. There. So it's just because what that does is puts a lighter load on the GI tract and makes it easier for the GI bacteria and enzymes to adapt to some of these new foods. But it's just not giving high loads of food to the digestive tract while we're doing these changeovers. The way I like to do it is start. Okay, let's go back to the 1 cup, say 1 cup once a day, okay? And you can just transpose this to however much you're feeding your pets. But so for the first 3 to 4 days, you would give 1/4 of that cup to be the new food, okay? So say we're changing over from Nature's Logic beef to Nature's Logic chicken. So 25% of the new food would be Nature's Logic chicken, and 75% or 3/4 of a cup would be the old food or the Nature's Logic beef. Okay, we do that for 3 to 4 days. And we just want to watch for anything that seems uncomfortable as far as gas or going off feed or changes in the stool, anything like that. So as long as they're eating well and happy and active and going on their walks, then you can proceed to the next step, which would be 50% or half a cup of Nature's Logic chicken, the new food, plus 50% or half a cup of Nature's Logic beef, which is the old food. And we do that for another 3 to 4 days. Okay. At the end of that 3-4 days, as long as everything's looking good, we'd move to the next step, and that would be 3/4 of a cup of the Nature's Logic chicken, and 1/4 cup of the Nature's Logic beef, which was our older food, and do that for another 3 to 4 days. And then at the end of that period, we could change over to 100% of the Nature's Logic chicken, and then feed the new food for probably 3 to 4 weeks to give the GI tract a chance to really adapt to the new food. And then we could get back on our rotating schedule as far as what you wanted to do. What the next food, say that would be the Nature's Logic turkey, and we would use that same. Say we would feed the new food chicken for 4 weeks, and then after 4 weeks, we'd look at doing this same changeover with the turkey. And then 4 to 6 weeks later, we would do that with fish. Now, once we've entered or introduced these foods to your pets, then you'll be able to make rotation changeovers much faster. What I like to do is you don't necessarily have to do this 25%, 75%, 50-50, like that. But what you can do is when your bag or your supply gets down to the final week or so that you're going to have to buy new food, that's the time to buy new food and mix that 1/4 of the old stuff with a whole bag of new, and then you just that's a gradual change. There aren't any big abrupt changes, and it can be that easy, because every time you alternate foods and add new foods, the gut will become stronger and more adaptable, and less likely to have any kind of problems.
Dr. Cameron, can I just interrupt you for a second?
Sure can.
You're kind of off camera. I think maybe you have your notes in front of your.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
No, that's great. Okay. So, so that is how we would change over foods. Now, this can also, every animal is individual, and you know them much better than I do. So we joke about they haven't seen this talk or read any of my notes, so they don't know exactly how to do this. We have to gear this to how they are. If you know your animal has a very sensitive stomach, I would tend to go slower with them. And so on that first step of 25% of the new food and 75% of the old food, you can go 5 to 7 days, 7 to 10 days, or even 10 to 14 days to give them a longer time to adapt to the new food before changing it to a larger portion of the new food. So so this can be shorter or longer depending on your pet. So don't be afraid to talk with your veterinarian as far as if you feel there's some things that aren't going the way you want it to be. So let's talk about some troubleshooting or things to watch for when we're changing over. When we're introducing new foods, very often, if it is a totally new food or new protein that your animal has never had before, it could be that the digestive tract doesn't have a good population of bacteria and enzymes to digest that food. And so digestion goes a little slower. Sometimes it's not as complete, and there can be some excess gas. There can be a reduced appetite, some vomiting and diarrhea, reduced activity. And a lot of dogs don't show any symptoms whatsoever. But if your dog shows any signs during this changeover, it's a good idea to just stop all food for about 12 hours. Okay, keep water available, but you'd want to talk to your vet if symptoms persisted. But if we see symptoms, sometimes that tells us that we're just moving a little too fast. Sometimes we'll see symptoms farther along in the changeover period, like maybe when you go to 50-50 or 75-25 there, those last two steps. And if that's the case, what I tend to have people do is go back to the last mixture that the dog was tolerating. So maybe we'd take them back to the 25% new and 75% old. Or we could even go back to the old food for just a few days while things calm down and then start it again. And again, go longer and slower until things and just give your pet a longer chance to do that. And so there are some pets that do have food allergies, that there are some proteins that they can't eat. And if symptoms do keep coming back, you want to take the food out of that rotation. Okay, there are some animals that can't eat lamb or turkey or something like that. It's just something that sometimes you can get some help from your veterinarian, but a lot of it is just trial and error and getting to know your pet. All right, so it's not unusual that some pets can't handle this. So there are some other options for variety in adding variety to your pet's diet. We talked a lot about mostly dry food here, but you can rotate your dog's proteins and types of foods. So there are wet or canned foods. We've got dry food. There's fresh foods. raw foods, lightly steamed foods, and so this is something that each one of those can add a significant amount of variety, and dramatically increase the variety in your dog or cat's diet. So you'd want to follow the guidelines of introducing any new food. So just be careful there. And eventually down the road, what you would like to do is start introducing a food or two outside of the line of food that you're feeding, because even though it might be the same proteins, the manufacturing processes are very different between companies, and they source their ingredients differently, and they expose them to temperatures differently. So we can see a whole different nutrient profile with foods outside of the current line that you're feeding. So this is something that we've got a lot of different ways to increase variety in our pets, and really it's been proven in people and in pets that adding variety to the diet has a lot of beneficial health effects. It can affect behavior, and the best news is that that variety in the diet has been shown to increase lifespan in dogs and cats. Some of the longest lived, if you look in the Guinness Book of World Records, there's a man down in Texas who's been in twice with cats that he owned, and he attributes it all to feeding them variety in their diet, and I really think that that's the best way to go. So I hope that makes some sense to you there. But there are many advantages to rotating these and providing variety in your pet's diet. So I'd encourage you to give this a look and do your best to get some variety in your pets. So
you got a 10-minute warning.
Okay, well, actually, that's it
that's
for
good.
me. And so if there are any people with any questions, I'd be happy to address those now.
Okay, super. We do have several questions. So, and I don't know, Bob, if you're there, you want to join us in case you want to pick up one or two of those questions.
Sure.
Our first question, Gina has a 5.5-month-old puppy who is a very, very picky eater and hardly eats. She has to sit with her dog to get them to eat. She's tried a number of really great brands of food, and has also, given her different proteins. She's introduced her puppy to kangaroo, chicken, turkey, and salmon. So do you have any suggestions for the puppy? Should she continue to rotate her foods? She tends to love the food for the first day or two and then just doesn't like it anymore. So Gina needs help with ideas about her 5-month-old puppy. Dr. Cameron, do you have any advice? I have a little bit of advice, but I'd like to hear from you. I'd like to have your advice.
Well, let's both give some advice. It's unusual to see a real young dog to start off being picky, and that makes me think that maybe there's something in the digestive tract that isn't handling food well. A lot of times after they eat, they don't feel real well. So if the body's not handling it, one of the things that I find that increases palatability is just warming the food a little bit. If it's dry food, then adding warm water or broth to the food can help those. So those are the other is to talk to your vet about some probiotics and or digestive enzymes, because those are, it's difficult to know exactly where a deficiency might be. But apple cider vinegar, probiotics, and digestive enzymes are things that I use a lot in animals like this. And lastly, I tend to put food down for a short period of time, and then pick it up and don't feed anything until the next meal. So and get plenty of exercise. Exercise moves the bowels and forces it encourages them to go to the bathroom. So going to the bathroom tends to stimulate hunger. So those are some things I tend to do.
And on your point about digestive enzymes, I think that adding a probiotic would help strengthen the gut, but we can do it in a palatable way, perhaps introducing some goat milk, which is loaded with probiotics. Some raw goat milk would help. But my question to you, Dr. Cameron, on Gina's issue is the puppy's 5.5 months old. Is that too much rotation for a young digestive tract, or different brands and different proteins?
It could be. And especially with this dog having a picky appetite, we don't know exactly what's going on. So yeah, I would now she said, I mean, she's obviously done a great job of trying to try anything. And so she's tried a lot of different foods, and the dog will eat for a day or two and then stop. So I think that I would not be in a big hurry to just get a new food every other day. I would pick one or two and stick with them and do some of the others as far as adding digestive enzymes and or probiotics, and then being a little less accommodating to where we let the dog get hungry there. But some of these dogs can be very hard-headed, or it really depends on where they, how they were fed when they were puppies as well. So it's hard to know exactly where this pickiness comes from.
Right. And it's particularly hard when you have a puppy, in our experience, that you tend to panic feed. If the puppy doesn't eat breakfast, you think, okay, it's the food, or it might be the bowl, or it might be so you tend to panic feed. You go out and you try to kind of introduce things in the hope that they'll like it because they're puppies and you want them to grow and you're concerned about their growth. But if a puppy doesn't if a puppy skips a meal, it's not such a tragedy. They'll be hungrier the next meal. To your point, Dr. Cameron, about being too accommodating, and it's our general disposition to want, our dogs to be well fed and not to be hungry. And we're afraid, that they will. But, I think with a puppy, taking it a little bit more slowly is okay, because they need to grow into their digestive system a little bit. But probiotic, I think, would be a big benefit in this case. So.
I agree. And even feeding some of these toppers that we talk about, particularly steamed vegetables that can add fiber to the gut, that's going to support and the growth of more beneficial bacteria, mm-hmm. and have prebiotics and things like that. So but again, I really exercise these dogs a lot between meals, and I mean, as you can, obviously we work and things like that, but I agree with what you've said. So those are some things that I would be trying with this dog.
Okay. Dave asks, our next question. Dave asks, if you have a dog with an extremely sensitive stomach, is it still good to change proteins?
Well, I think it is. As I mentioned, that animals that have been fed the same food for a long period of time tend to have sensitive stomachs if they get anything outside of that narrow range of foods. So, and the therapy or the treatment for food sensitivities tends to be trying to widen the variety of food that they eat. These are animals, though, that you can't necessarily grab four types of foods and just start, hitting it hard. These are animals you have to go very, very cautiously, and we have to and I'd work with your veterinarian to see exactly, or it's hard to say exactly, but do some things like the probiotics or enzymes to be sure we're supporting the digestive system, that it's able to handle these foods. But those are animals that when I do that changeover schedule, I'll cut it back to an eighth of a, if say the animal's getting a cup per meal, I'd go an eighth of a cup of the new stuff for 5 to 7 days or longer, and 7/8 of a cup of the old food, and see how they do with that. And because there are some animals that are just that sensitive that they will have problems with small amounts. I also, if you're feeding dry food, I want to be sure that you're moistening the food before you feed it, because with either warm water or broth, we've had a lot of animals with sensitive stomachs that their symptoms have really calmed down when we started feeding them either wet food or moistening the dry food before we feed them. So those are some things I would look at. I think that it's always important to add variety as you can, but we have to do it without making them sick, and doing it conservatively and gradually. So, and yours having a very sensitive stomach, you'd have to do it on a much slower pace than what I talked about earlier.
Okay. Very good. That's good advice.
It's another great opportunity for probiotics. And as
truly,
Dr.
yes,
you can absolutely use another type of food. So whether it is raw or cans, to add that moisture in and make that transition much easier.
Okay. Very good. Good advice. Thank you. Stephanie asks, you talked earlier about food energetics. Stephanie wants to know, what are the warming foods? Okay.
The warming foods are, let me grab my notes here. Chicken is the main one. So chicken, lamb, and bison are primary warming foods. And there is debate on some of these. You'll look on different lists and different traditional Chinese medicine people, and they consider sometimes beef will come into it as neutral, and some it will be a more of a warming food. So what I'm particularly interested in are the warming foods. I mean, more than any other, because we have so many inflammatory conditions in our dogs and cats. And so if somebody comes in with chronic inflammation, being allergies or arthritis or other things like that, and they're getting chicken, that to me is something we need to address. And so I'm not a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner. People who do acupuncture and traditional Chinese herbs are much more adept at these food energetics. But I know that just getting animals off warming proteins has helped move us along toward lessening symptoms of allergies and inflammation.
So if you had, so you would go then to a cooling protein.
I would.
Right. So then a cooling protein would be a lot of the fishes or fish.
Fish,
duck.
turkey. Well, turkey's more neutral. But the where to put it.
A cold water fish, not necessarily like the fish that swim in the river. You know, think about like a duck. You know, duck is also known to be cooling, and it's because, you know, anything that I think of that is in a cold environment might be more of a, like, you know, salmon.
Truly.
So
so whitefish is another cooling. So whitefish, duck, and rabbit are the three I had for cooling proteins there. And so you know, it's always a good idea to pick these foods with guidance from somebody who does this, you know, veterinarian who can help you with this. But
so
I think
there is a veterinarian who can help you with that. I don't know if I'm sure you've heard of Dr. Judy Morgan.
Of course.
She's a holistic veterinarian. Actually, I think she's from New Jersey, but she's published a couple of books where she talks about energetics. Her book is called Yin and Yang Nutrition for Dogs. And she talks about what's cooling, what's warming, what's a damp food. And so it's a really good book. So if you want to learn more about, you know, cooling foods and warming foods and damp foods and foods that will rid the damp, she talks a lot about arthritic dogs in the book and how to feed them to reduce the inflammation in their diet. So
sure. And that's, you know, yin and yang is talking about balance. And so that's what she's doing. And she's obviously a lot more adept at that than I am, but that's a great recommendation. And I think it's something that as Westerners, we need to pay more attention to the energetics of the foods we're feeding.
Right. I agree. Susan asks if it would be okay to mix the variety on a more frequent basis, such as adding raw dinner to a kibble or maybe a chicken topper for morning on a salmon kibble, like maybe instead of rotating the base kibble, rotate by introducing toppers.
I think, I can't tell you the technical details of what happens when you do that, but it's variety. So it's getting different proteins, and there is no orthodox way of mixing foods. So as long as you're creating variety in the diet, I think that's a really good thing. And I'm a fresh food feeder. I recommend that, and so I really like the idea of getting some fresh food or lightly steamed food in the diet. But by doing the things you're talking about doing, you're doing a good job of getting variety in your pet's diet.
Okay, very good. Jason. His situation is he has a 5-year-old female Coton. It's good to know the breed, who was diagnosed with fairly severe DJD, degenerative joint disorder. I have heard cooling meats like rabbit and sardine, duck and salmon and pork would be better proteins for her. She eats Nature's Logic kibble and cans. I mentioned the brand only because it's the brand that you're associated with. Other recommendations? Are there any other recommendations that would be better anti-inflammatory for her? Should she go to fresh or raw food feeding? Dr. Cameron?
Well, yeah. So I would definitely stay to neutral and cooling proteins. I think this is an important point in a dog with degenerative joint disease. So yes, I would get some guidance on going with cooling proteins, staying away very low carb type diets. Okay, we want to have low carb diets because the high carb diets tend to be fairly inflammatory, and adding additional vegetables to mixtures of steamed vegetables can have some really good effects on, so low carb and higher vegetable content can be very, very beneficial And I'd stay away from as dry food as you can. Okay, I don't know how practical that is for you, but dry food is the highest carb food out there, and so so staying with foods with more moisture, more green vegetables, and cooling proteins. That's where I would tend to go.
And Jason has a Catan, so it's a smaller dog. So feeding a wet diet isn't, as cost prohibitive as, feeding a German Shepherd or a Saint Bernard,
Exactly.
So good.
Exactly.
So Pixie has a dog that's allergic to goat milk. Are there other alternatives to goat milk? Dr. Cameron, I think if you're looking to add moisture to the diet or probiotic to the diet, there are some alternatives. Are you familiar with this issue?
I am. What I tend to go for in adding variety and also trying to support the GI tract is the Answers meats that have probiotic or kombucha combinations of things in there that really help the GI tract to increase the beneficial bacteria in their guts, and also, as Bob mentioned before, a supplemental probiotic is something that I would look at as well.
And Bob, I know you're familiar with. There's a brand, Carnivore, and they have a Flora. It's sprouted seeds, which is a really great high protein. High nutrient dense probiotic naturally, without it being a processed probiotic like a digestive enzyme would be, and that comes as a powder. It's available in our stores. It's available at a number of other stores as well. And you can add a little bit of bone broth to that to kind of make it like a slurry to add to your food. So I would recommend the Carnivore. I think it's called Florafor, is the actual powder. So and it is available at CB Pet Market. And you can add that to your Nature's Logic food.
Another great mixture or a mixer for that is a pumpkin puree as well.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good idea.
Yep.
That's a good idea. So yeah, I think that the commercial supplements are great, but I would sure want to mix some kind of fresh food in the diet as well for that kind of fiber and other prebiotic type activity that can really help improve the whole digestive environment.
Right. Okay. Anthony asks, should you do anything special if you are feeding or rotating moist and dry food? I don't. So if you're rotating with a moist and dry food, meaning adding them together, you just have to be careful about how long you leave a food that is wet down. I
think so. Yeah, I think so. No, I don't have a problem with mixing them together. I as a rule, I like people to moisten the dry food whenever they feed it. Okay, I don't even if we're mixing it with wet food, because dry food is somewhere between 10 and 15% moisture, and whole food, canned food, or fresh food is about 70 to 80% moisture. So adding some moisture to dry food brings those a little closer and gets dry food is somewhat drying. Okay. And so adding broth or moisture to dry food, I find has a lot of different digestive benefits.
Yep. Dr. Cameron is frozen.
Oh, could you still hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay. Did I blank out somehow?
Yeah, you stopped at adding to food, and that last sentence, your last sentence didn't come across.
Oh, okay. So adding moisture to food is something that tends to bring the moisture content of dry food and wet food a little more closer to real food. So I always like to add some moisture to dry food when we feed it.
Okay, good. Stephanie asks, based on nature, she does not feed her dog grains. He is shiny and energetic. Is it okay not to feed grains?
Yes, I think it is okay to not feed grains. I would, also want to know what you are feeding. Obviously, you're doing some things right because he's active, happy, and has a shiny coat. So you're doing some good things. Dogs don't have a true carbohydrate requirement, and so no, they don't absolutely have to have grain in their foods. And so I'd love to see a picture of your dog because it sounds like you're doing some very good things.
Cool. And then Anthony has a 14-year-old. How much rotation should you do with a 14-year-old? Because as our dogs become senior, they also have changes in their digestive system and their ability to metabolize food. So what are your thoughts about rotating in a senior dog?
Okay, so we always want to be careful. We want to be careful and moving slowly, making changes slowly. Older animals and older people tend to have lower amounts of hydrochloric acid or stomach acid, which is the big one to make your stomach move to mix the food and also to break protein and cartilage down in the stomach. And so that can make changing proteins a little difficult as they get older. So I'm not sure what this 14-year-old, if it has any sensitive stomachs or any stomach issues there. So I would tend to just do a much slower changeover and not worry about moving to 4 foods. I would be happy with going for a couple, 2-3 months with just 2 foods and see if we could, because it's never too late to do this as long as we don't upset their system. So if we do this gradually and just keep it to where they're not showing symptoms. Variety is going to do the same things that we talked about earlier with an older dog as far as improving digestive health there. So we just need to do it slowly. So, and I would also add a probiotic to this dog as well. I think they could all benefit from that.
What are your thoughts about with a senior dog? Because their digestive system is, has some issues. If you feeding a higher protein food than maybe you had fed during their mature, before they matured, during their adult years.
Okay. So feeding a higher protein than an adult dog in a senior dog.
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Well, and that makes sense. The senior foods tend to have lower amounts of protein. And there's a lot of debate as far as higher protein foods being bad for the liver and for the kidney, and there are a lot of us holistic veterinarians who don't necessarily agree with that. And so And when older animals have less efficient digestion, they're not getting as much out of that same bite of food. So we have to feed them more or a richer food. So very often we will use things like either toppers or canned food or say puppy food, right? That is a growth formula there, or feeding fresh foods with it. But with all of them, you want to do it with guidance from your veterinarian, because we just want to do it gradually. And as that caller who called in earlier saying that her dog is shiny and active and happy without grains, that's a good barometer of how well we're doing. So we'd want to use that same barometer on your older dog.
Okay, agreed. Okay, good. We have time for a couple more questions. And is there, Stephanie asks if there's any specific protein that is more associated with ear infections. So I don't know if we think that that's more associated with a breed predisposition, but she's asking if there's a protein that she should avoid so that her dog doesn't have ear infections.
Okay. I don't know of a protein that has been directly related to ear infections, but ear infections tend to be systemic inflammatory conditions, and so I would tend to stay away from those warming proteins like chicken and I'm forgetting chicken, lamb, chicken and lamb.
Venison.
Those are those are chicken, lamb, bison, and venison. So those I think. In my experience, the ear infections are very much related to food sensitivities. I really felt that they were more related to the carbohydrate parts of the food, but regardless, the warming foods of chicken, lamb, venison, and bison would contribute to inflammation if fed long term. So those are foods I would stay away from.
Okay. All right. And our final question.
Feedback I'd throw in on the feedback I'd throw in on that too is, as Dr. Cameron pointed out earlier, starches tend to be the problems here. And not only that, but the sugar content. So it's not so much a question of grains or grain free. It's what the starch is and what the sugar content of that starch is. Contribute heavily to those ear infections. So something like peas that tend to be high in sugar is probably something you'd want to avoid in a dog issues. Yep.
Okay. And our final question: does fresh equal raw? And not necessarily. Fresh can be raw, but not all raw is fresh, but maybe not all fresh is raw. Is that a fair characterization, Dr. Cameron?
I think it is, and I think that there's just a lot of nerves about feeding fresh food. So I am a big fan of lightly steamed vegetables and getting those in the diet regularly. With meat, every time we cook something, we do lose some nutrition. So I think all animals benefit from some all raw food. But we have to be aware that some animals can't tolerate large amounts of raw meat, and so lightly cooked or something of that nature is something we have to individualize for each one. But I've found that every animal that I've seen has benefited from some amount of fresh food in the diet. Because vegetables have a lot of collagen or fiber in them, steaming them breaks that down and makes those a little easier to digest. So that's the exception there. But some raw meat and then lightly cooked raw meat, those are things that I like to find a combination that agrees with my dog or whatever patient I'm seeing.
Okay. All right. Well, those are our questions for this evening. I think we had some really nice questions from our participants. I want to thank everybody for attending this evening. You will be receiving an email with a link to the video and a $5 coupon good toward the purchase of a small bag of Nature's Logic to help us accommodate a transition and a rotation of protein in the diet. Dr. Cameron, I want to thank you. It is a wonderful partnership and that CB Pet Market has with Nature's Logic, and that they allow us to have access to have you present at our webinars, and we do appreciate that. Bob, thank you. I am going to end the webinar right now. And again, I thank Dr. Cameron and Bob, and I thank all of you for attending this evening. If you have any other questions that we didn't get to tonight, or if you think about something overnight, you can feel free when you receive the email to respond, and we'll get your questions to Dr. Cameron or myself or Bob, and we'll be sure to get you answers. So again, thank you all for attending this evening. Dr. Cameron, thank you. Bob, thank you. Everybody have a great night. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye now.